By the way, Lance is my hero. Fernando Alonso set the tone early for his brotherly love relationship with Lance Stroll, and since making that declaration, he's made plenty of effort to look out for his new teammate. Given there's nearly 20 years between them in age and Alonso's reputation for clashing with teammates or chewing them up and spitting them out, it wasn't guaranteed that they get on so well. In fact, the closest thing to a disagreement they've had so far was when we found out that Alonso isn't Stroll's hero, because Stroll used to cheer for Michael Schumacher to beat Alonso back when he was a kid. Since then, their relationship has blossomed, so why is that? Alonso has been talking Stroll up since before pre-season, and after claiming a podium finish on his Aston Martin debut, Alonso declared Stroll was his hero for managing to get through a Grand Prix with the injuries he was recovering from at the time. Alonso has even taken his kindness out on track several times this year. In Azerbaijan, he told his team to share a brake balance change he had made. Stroll only found out after the race that had been passed on from Alonso. In Miami, Alonso impressively managed to catch Stroll making an overtake on the big screens, and as well as praising the great move, he checked in to see which position his teammate was up to, having started on the penultimate row of the grid. Alonso shrugged off noticing that move, saying the big screens were well positioned by slow speed corners, so he considered it very easy to follow the race on TV, and when he saw the pass, he was just curious about which position it was for. This attracted a playful response from Red Bull drivers Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez in the Miami press conference, with Verstappen recalling the Baku radio message and saying Alonso was like a life coach, while Perez joked that Alonso was watching the screens and telling Stroll which side to go to overtake cars. Alonso was at it again in the Spanish Grand Prix, where despite having a slightly disappointing home race, he said he would not challenge Stroll as he caught him for 6th in the closing stages. Showing that this works both ways, that had echoes of Stroll doing similar in Baku, where he closed up on Alonso and said he wouldn't attack because they were playing the same game strategically. Ever the gentleman, Alonso responded by saying Stroll could have a go, but he eventually left him behind to finish half a minute ahead. It's easy to forget how close this all came to going wrong 4 corners into the season, when Stroll clipped the back of Alonso on the opening lap of the Bahrain Grand Prix. Alonso didn't know who'd hit him, but he made clear he was deeply unimpressed on the radio. His engineer did his best to take the heat out of the situation at the time, vaguely telling Alonso the team were reviewing the incident. A jubilant podium-grabbing Alonso was then told on the slowing down lap after the race it was Stroll that hit him at the start. Alonso didn't sound bothered, said he thought it was George Russell's Mercedes, and later in the lap he declared Stroll was his hero. Given everything we've seen from Alonso towards Stroll this year, we're not sure why the team didn't just tell him at the time, given the contact was accidental and neither car was damaged. Alonso isn't someone who ever sounds stressed driving an F1 car, so there was little risk of him overreacting because he was too worked up. Perhaps now team and driver know each other a bit better, and the relationship with Stroll has continued to blossom, there'd be less hesitation to give Alonso the facts at the time. While Alonso has been grabbing all the headlines for Aston Martin with his podium finishes, that brilliance has heightened the pressure on Stroll. Of all the teams this year, the points gap between the Aston Martin drivers is the biggest, and prior to the recent Spanish Grand Prix, Stroll was yet to out-qualify Alonso or finish ahead of him in a race. He put both of those things right in Spain, but that was assisted by Alonso's car carrying damage in qualifying after his off in Q1, self-inflicted in fairness, and it was pretty clear at the end of the race that Alonso could have passed Stroll if he'd wanted to maintain his 100% record over him. Alonso has had 5 podium finishes this year, more than everyone except Max Verstappen, while Stroll's best finish is the 4th place he picked up in Australia, where he benefited from avoiding the chaos on the late restart, having been running 6th before the red flag. But Alonso launched an impassioned defence of Stroll, lamenting the easy headlines that were being drawn up based on his results without factoring in his bad luck. Alonso praised Stroll's pace when driving with one hand in Bahrain and pointed out Stroll was running 4th in the opening stint in Saudi Arabia before his car failed. He put Stroll's Q1 elimination in Miami down to the team taking too much risk by trying to save tyres for later in the session, and he sympathised with Stroll's Monaco qualifying session being compromised by hitting debris. Alonso says Stroll is giving good feedback and input on strategy, and he declared the Canadian isn't missing any pace, he just needs opportunistic moments to start going his way. Alonso's also picked up on a narrative that has always swirled around Stroll ever since he came into F1. It's often been questioned how much Stroll wants to be an F1 driver, and if his career is as much or more of a desire of his father Lawrence's, who of course owns Aston Martin. Alonso was straight onto that early in the season, saying he was aware that sometimes people think he is not motivated to drive, but Alonso doesn't believe that's the case. If anything, Alonso's defense of Stroll is more impassioned than Lance puts up himself. Stroll didn't want to hide behind any excuses of luck, saying that's just how it goes. But perhaps after years of facing these sorts of questions, Stroll is tired of defending himself or has given up feeling the need to justify his place in F1 to outsiders. Whereas defending him is a new challenge for Alonso, and Alonso doesn't do anything half-heartedly. Which brings us to the big question, why is Alonso working so hard to talk Stroll up? We're only partway through the first season of the Alonso-Stroll partnership, and already there are lots of reasons becoming clear for why Alonso has claimed ownership of the Lance Stroll fan club. Let's do the reasons Alonso has given first, then we'll get into the slightly more cynical ones. Alonso set his stall out before pre-season testing, declaring in an interview released by Aston Martin that he believes Stroll has the potential to be a world champion in the future. We know this is a view held by Lance Stroll as well. Alonso said it would be special to one day see Stroll become world champion, knowing he would have played a part in helping it happen. Alonso also accepts he's closer to the end than the beginning of his career now, and he sees it as his mission to help Aston Martin shortcut its way to the top and to set the team up to be led by Stroll for the next 10 to 15 years. While he hopes the team can start winning races and fighting for championships while he's still driving, Alonso said he would still be very proud of his contribution, even if things only come good once he has stepped back from racing. Alonso also dismissed the idea that he eats F1 teammates for breakfast, claiming that he's always tried to help them in the ways he is helping Stroll. Alonso says the only difference this time is that whoever is controlling which radio messages get played during TV broadcasts is being kind to him by showing what a team player he is. He also praised Stroll's role in their relationship as well, while taking a dig at former teammate Esteban Ocon in the process. Alonso said at Alpine he was always Ocon's first target, which worked against the best interests of the team, but he feels Stroll is smart in knowing it's a team game. Alonso said it was agreed before the season with team boss Mike Crack and chief executive Martin Whitmarsh that the drivers would play this kind of game to maximise its chances of putting up a fight against teams like Mercedes and Ferrari. That all makes sense, and it's a credit to the drivers and the team that they've managed to work so well together, propelling Aston Martin firmly in the battle to be best of the rest behind Red Bull, even if it's Alonso doing most of the heavy lifting points-wise so far. So what about those cynical reasons we mentioned? Well, let's face it, Alonso knows who the real boss is at Aston Martin and the man signing his considerable checks, and that's Lance's dad, Lawrence. He'll also be aware of Lawrence's ambitions and belief in his son, so it makes sense that Alonso would want to talk up Stroll's potential in a similar way, offer to help, and be seen to be playing nice with the boss's son. Also, if you're comfortably beating your teammate, then it looks like an even better achievement if you keep telling people how good that teammate is. And would Alonso be so helpful to a teammate who is right on his level and capable of beating him every weekend? Perhaps he's more willing to offer Stroll help because he doesn't view him as a threat. Even the decision to stay behind Stroll in Spain can be viewed through this lens. Yes, Alonso was absolutely right that if he got ahead of Stroll, it wasn't going to make any difference to the number of points Aston Martin took home from the weekend, so it wasn't worth the risk. But it could also be seen as a harmless way to bank some brownie points. Fernando Alonso doesn't get up every morning and dedicate his life to this to turn 7th places into 6th, so he was able to make a gesture towards Stroll with very little downside for him. If the Aston Martin teammates are ever in the position where they are fighting for a win, you can imagine Alonso would be less inclined to follow Stroll home just because the points would be the same for the team whichever way round the cars finished.